Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. It's a great pleasure to see so many of you here this afternoon. Thank you very much for attending. We are going to have this talk now. John Limbert, who is a member, who not all of you may know that. His talk today is about a small military expedition to Everest Base Camp in March 1985. Gosh, where was I in 1985? I do know, actually. I was at Gütersloh in Germany. We were closing it down, I think, but maybe not. Right. This year is the 40th anniversary of his base camp expedition. He'll tell you what he needed to do in leading the expedition and what happened along the way. So we are waiting with bated breath. Thank you, John. Welcome, welcome.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for such a good turnout. I'm going to do this afternoon's talk in 3 parts, really. One is a little bit about this mountain. Number 2 is about what I had to do to be able to take a military expedition to the mountain. And the 3rd part is what happened. So, this majestic mountain, this here is called the Western Combe. It's slotted in between the mountains. And it takes you up onto the Khumbu Glacier, hidden behind this part here. And the aim of the expeditions now that want to go to the summit, what they call the most common route, is to ascend the Khumbu Glacier up to the ice wall, get onto this ridge, the southwest ridge, and ascend that. It was never my intention to go to the summit. 1, because of cost. 2, because of time. I didn't believe, and I probably still don't believe, that I would have had the experience, the expertise to overcome that sort of walk or climb. So my intention was only to go to Everest Base Camp. So a little bit about this mountain. It's 29,000 feet high, and we know that through surveyor geographer George Everest, who worked for Eastern India between the period of 1830 to 1843. He identified a lot of the mountains in the Himalaya, but he didn't give them the name. He used Roman numerals. So Everest was formerly or originally known as XV. It was only in 1865, when the Royal Geographic Society said, we can't go on calling it XV or 15. What are we going to do? And they decided to honour George Everest and approached him. He felt a little bit embarrassed, but it was delighted to have it called after him. And that's what happened in 1865. Since then, it's always been known as Everest. Locally, it's known as Sagarmatha, but to you and I, we would always call it Everest. Once it was identified as the largest mountain in the world, lots of people wanted to go and attempt to climb it. But every group failed, either because of lack of weather, lack of experience at high altitude, and their abilities to cope with this mountain. It wasn't until 1924 that the most serious attempt was made by Andrew Irvine and George Mallory. They were last seen alive at 8,000 meters, getting quite close to the top. But tragically, they were lost and have never, ever been found. It wasn't until the 29th of May in 1953 when Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay made a successful summit and descent to be honoured as the first people to climb Everest. Since then, there have been lots of people climbing. And that's with the advent of professionalism. In 1992, Nepal enabled professional organizations to set up in Kathmandu and take groups to Everest Base Camp or the summit. And 2 years ago, in 22-23, the professional groups had their most successful outcome of getting people to the summit. Nearly 800 people summited Mount Everest in one season. A season for Everest is about March through to late August. So in that period, there were lots and lots of people on that mountain. But it isn't without its fatalities. We can expect normally between 10 to 15 people are going to be fatalities and not come home. So there is the disclaimer with all of the professional organizations, we will do everything we can to get you, but you have to make some personal decisions. The first British woman was Rebecca Stevens. Just after the professionals had established, she joined one of those groups, and it was an American organization that safely got her to the top and got her back down again. So, what about me? How did I get this passion to want to go to Everest? So a little bit about my background. I joined the Royal Air Force in 1974 to become a physical training instructor, or become PTI as it's commonly known. And during that training, we were told that we were going to go on experiential work learning experience. So they took us down to RAF Headley Court, where we were showed the work of the remedial gymnasts, now known as physiotherapists. We went to the parachuting centre, which was at that time was RAF Abingdon, and we did 2 descents out of a balloon from 800 feet, and then we were kicked out the back of an aircraft at 1,200 feet. So I did 4 descents by parachute. We then went to a joint service mountaineering centre in North Wales at a small town called Llanrwst, where we were taken into the Snowdonia Mountains. We were taught how to use a map and compass effectively and to be safe in the mountains. And I fell in love. The experience of going somewhere that you felt comfortable, a little bit more remote, and being safe is such a passion that is not suited to everybody, but it did suit me. So I expressed that I wanted to go down that route. And then for the following period, I trained to be a qualified mountain instructor. That involves ascending at least 20 mountains in a summer environment, getting that in a logbook, getting it verified, and when you're ready, presenting yourself at a national centre to sit the exam and be assessed of your competence in a mountain summer environment. Having passed that, you then go on to become a winter leader. And the only way we can do that in the UK is to go to Scotland. So I was fortunate to be able to be posted to RAF Grandtown-on-Spey, just in the Cairngorm area. And from there, I gained my experience again, going into winter mountaineering. Similar sort of thing. Once you're ready, you go to a national centre, and that is Glenmore Lodge in the Cairngorms, where you sit the exam, they take you out and they assess your competence in a winter environment. And then the last one is all round, are you capable of successfully teaching a group about mountaineering, looking after them? And when you're ready, go to another centre to be assessed. And that one was called Plassie Brennan at Capel Curig, where I set the exams and then was assessed of my competence at leading people. Thankfully, I passed that, and then I went on to do other bits and training that was vital for the work that I was doing. Pre-hospital emergency care at Bangor University Hospital, and then I landed up following the route of becoming a mountain rescue instructor. This gave me a nice package to build confidence that I could take people in the mountains. I was okay with UK, but at this time I needed to broaden out my experience. So I started looking further apart, and it was prior to Sekong how I built experience. I started going into Europe and climbing the European mountains, including this one. I've done 2 successful ascents of taking people to the summit of Mont Blanc, as well as the mountains. Following this one, I was working at RAF Cosford in Wolverhampton, and my boss said, the station commander wants to see you. And he said he wants to mention something about mountaineering, and I wasn't quite sure. But when I got in there, he sat me down and he said, I want to achieve my goal. And he said, take me to the summit. I said, yes, sir. So with 4 other people, I took him safely to the summit of the Matterhorn, and he was over the moon. From there on, I felt, now I've got the confidence of the senior officers, I'm ready to go and take on the rest of bits and pieces. So in 83 to 86, I was stationed at RAF Sekong in Hong Kong. And the purpose of the military then, well, the army was to protect the border between Hong Kong and China. We had a Navy patrol for the South China Sea. And we had the RAF supporting the troop movements out there across the border to protect it. For me, my role was given over to work with the Civil Aid Service. And my job was to try and train 75 locals in emergency rescue techniques. Because at that time, that was the entrance to Kai Tak Airport. There was always the risk that one of those things just might deviate, and it would have been absolutely catastrophic. Frightening to think about it. The other thing is that right at the back of this is a ridge of mountains called Lion Rock, appropriately named because there was an outcrop of rock that gave you, if you use your imagination, a lion's head. So this approach to Kai Tak Airport was considered to be one of the top most dangerous airports in the world back in those days. Thankfully, there wasn't anything that did happen. Kai Tak Airport has now moved, and for anybody that's been out to Hong Kong, it's moved over to Lantau, where they've reclaimed the land and now have their airport there, a lot safer. But I thoroughly enjoyed the work there, working with the locals. They were very keen to want to learn, but thankfully, we never had to put it into most serious thing of actually doing anything. So what did I want to do from there? I was still eager to want to climb mountains. So I wanted to from Hong Kong, which is a stepping stone away to Nepal, I wanted to try and get my boss to be able to give me permission to want to go there, to allow me to go there, so that I could enhance my experience again about taking people safely into the mountains. I really wanted to see Everest firsthand. I'd seen it on videos, I'd seen pictures. I really wanted to feel it and just gain that experience. I wanted to take a few other people just to enable them to enjoy the experience. And thankfully, my boss agreed to allowing 3 weeks away from primary duties. It was necessary to get that permission because we needed the insurance for being on duty out in a dangerous environment. So I then had to come with an action plan. How could I get information about the route? Remember, this was before the professional organizations were established. and therefore I could only go to libraries, listen to anybody else that had been in the area. But thankfully, with working at Sekong, where the Gurkhas were training there, I could get information through the army sources. So it was information about how to go there, what was the best time. I'd managed to get permission. How do I then select a team? Is it going to be a combination of the Army, the Air Force, and the Navy? I thought about how do I go about this, and I did put a broad advertisement through the military processes to see who would be interested. And strangely enough, I only had representatives from the Royal Air Force that said, "Can I be considered, please?" That made it a lot easier for getting permission through the Air Force to enable other Air Force personnel to go. What equipment would I need? What is it going to cost? I was aware that we did have an RAF officer working in Kathmandu as a Gurkha liaison officer. So I contacted him, and he was very, very helpful about giving further information and enabled us to look at discount flights through the use of Cathay Pacific. So it did all start to come together. The next one was, how do I have the confidence that if we get RAF people, how do we actually get them fit enough, and are they serious to want to put this commitment? So we came up with a figure, or I did, thinking, I'm going to ask them to contribute £250 of their own money. And that will be the first thing, is no thanks. But in the interim period, I put a plan together to think, well, what am I going to do? The aim was to go into the capital, Kathmandu, and head northeast to Mount Everest, with the intention that if we were successful on getting to that area, how do we then come back? And I was advised to consider using Lukla, where there's a small airport, to fly out, because I was advised that if you do get to Everest Base Camp, you're going to be pretty tired. You won't want to walk out. So I took that on board and thinking, okay, I'll plan that. So I got a biggest map I could and think, well, what's my options? How do I do this? And I'd then sort of came to the point where it's going to be about 45, 50 miles of trekking. I thought that's not too bad until I started looking closely at the terrain when everything is up, down, up, down. So it becomes, although the distance doesn't seem to vary, incredibly tiring as you're going along. So these were my options. Namche Bazaar was always considered to be the cut-off point because of altitude. So having got this information, I then looked about, what do I do for the team? How do I select the team? And these landed up being the people that went on the expedition. And we did that through a process of fitness testing, determination by, if you want to do that, we need to generate some income. How are we going to do it? And we explored opportunities. So as you can see from that, there were 2 pilots. From the back, we had Andy that worked as an air load master on the helicopters. We had Ray, a dental technician. Simon that worked in in survival equipment. Hunter, a pilot. Richie, a ground engineer. And Chris, another pilot. We got on very well together, and that made it very important because we were going to be spending 3 weeks together, eating, sleeping, and drinking together. So we needed to know that even if we were tired, we wouldn't start fighting each other, which was quite important. So then we discussed the options about how we were going to get to the summit or get to the Everest Base Camp. We looked at and considered, on the basis of what we knew already, any other information that they could get. And this was what we decided. We would ascend to Everest Base Camp and return over the 12-day period. We left in a couple of days leeway if anything went wrong. But that was plan A, and we worked hard to try and stick to that. So the next one was, how do we get it funded? We had no real idea about how much it was going to cost. So as I mentioned earlier, we decided on £250 each as a personal contribution. We did a sponsored walk across Hong Kong. It's called Makalow's Trail, for anybody that's been to Hong Kong. It's a previous governor of Hong Kong, which is 100 kilometers long. We did that and did raise some money. We did it within 24 hours. We wrote to quite a number of large Hong Kong organizations, and I have to say one or two were very generous. There was a casino based in Macau, as well as in Hong Kong, and they gave us £3,000. So we had a lovely pot to build up. And Chris, one of the pilots, he volunteered to be the treasurer for the trip, which was great. Having got all this lot done, then the challenge was, can we get anything else out of the UK command headquarters? And again, they were very good. They said, we'll give you another £1,000. So we felt quite good in terms of money, but we had no real expectation, or we had no real knowledge about how we were going to spend it, and was it going to be enough? So we thought the only way we're going to do that is to actually get there, talk to the Gurkha liaison officer for further advice about how we could accumulate the equipment and how we could get to our starting point, which we decided was going to be jewelry. Again, he was very, very helpful. Whilst we were doing this, we had an opportunity to tour Kathmandu. It's a fascinating place. And if you ever want to go somewhere that's interesting, this is really, really should be on your bucket list, your wish list. It is really, really nice. We had a few days there while we were sorting bits and pieces out, and it's fascinating. I don't know, remember this is 40 years ago, I don't know if it's changed. It probably hasn't. It's probably still doing the same thing now. But it is great to be able to go out, see the temples, see how, and understand the culture a bit more, and how people went about their lives. Especially when you see women walking around the streets like this. How the hell she could balance that on her head, I've just absolutely no idea. But it was quite common for the people to carry quite heavy packs on their back, supported by around their foreheads, which took the majority of the pressure, and you'll see that later. Over the period of the first 4 days that we're there, this young gentleman was absolutely great. He helped us thanks to the local, the Gurkha liaison officer, to advise us on getting equipment, where to stay, how to do it, and work with the locals. And the one thing that he did advise us on, which I'm grateful for, he said, getting to Jewry, our start point for the expedition, would be very difficult unless you acquire your own commissioned vehicle. We had no idea how much that was, but we took his advice. He said, I'll arrange it. And he did. He commissioned this vehicle to get us to Jewry. Great. I was happy that Chris, the treasurer, felt that it was within our financial means. So you can see the amount of stuff that we'd built up. The other thing that we'd taken on board for the advice is you won't survive if you try and carry your own loads to the base camp. Employ porters. How much is that going to cost? And it was very, 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 very little. So again, we took that on board. We hired porters locally to be able to come with us. And he then said, you really, really do need somebody that will be able to interpret for you as you're going along. Okay? So we had another collection. And then he said, you don't really want to be cooking yourselves. So he said, take a cook. So we landed up with all these extras, but it was really good fun. And they all got on very, very well. So once we'd piled everything onto the vehicle, we started going out towards Jury. And this guy was there to stop other locals coming onto our bus. And that's exactly how they would travel. In, on the top, hanging on the back, anything to get them from A to B. So we enjoyed the luxury of getting there on our own vehicle. Eventually we got to Jury to start our walk. And it feels really, really great to be out on the trail, not knowing what we're doing, except following what appears to be a wide trail going uphill. Just take a note, that's how I was dressed in the foothills. By this time, it was probably day 2 or day 3 that I'd be wearing that rugby vest, but there was no laundrying, so you're a bit high, but try and disguise it. As we were coming out, there's lots of precarious bridges, but you become a little bit blasé after a while. You think, if it's good enough for the locals, it must be good enough for us. But morale was very, very high at this point. You can see how we're trying to get used to carrying heavy equipment in preparation for the harder work to come. Well, I left it to the guys to say, if you feel it's getting a bit too much with the weight, then employ or utilize our own porters, or employ a porter as we go through these little villages where we later learned were going to be tea houses, as they were called. So our aim was to camp each night, and the porters that we did have went ahead of us to be able to set up a camp and start preparing our evening meals for us. And that it all worked extremely well. The terrain was fascinating. The terraced farming, the valleys were superb. We were fortunate to have good weather that opened up all these vistas for us. And we were really delighted to see how people lived. No power. So if you wanted a house, hand tools, build your own. And that's the way in which the people lived up there and farmed up there. This was one of our porters. He had a hare lip, and for some reason, the others didn't fully accept him, but they did impose a lot on him. That was an incredibly heavy load. And you can see how this headband is taking the pressure of this, what they call a doko. It sits, a wicker basket that sits on his back. Look at the state of the guy. It never, as far as I knew, never had any shoes. But you couldn't help but like the guy. So what did I do? I gave him my rugby shirt. He put it on straight away. Whether he's still wearing it today, I have no idea. But he was fantastic. As we passed through these villages, it became very apparent that there are places that become areas of worship, Jumbezi, where they have prayer wheels, and you start to see there's monks in and around the areas. Until, there's one. I tried this doko. The strain on my neck, and that was a light one. And so I was very, very happy to give it back to him straight away. I put my rucksack on. But it was a great experience. This was fascinating. We went through a little village called Pading. And in Kathmandu, we were used to children coming to us, have you got any money? Got any money? This little boy was just going up and down the street with this toy. And when he came to us, held his hand out, and we got the local guy to explain what he was trying to say. He was asking if we got a crayon. The law of the jungle out there is if you can get something to write, you can go to school. They're just leaving chalkboards and now progressing on to writing, and they needed to have some form of writing implement. So we gave all the pens and pencils that we could possibly spare to him to be able to pass on. And we got the information of the head of the area so that when we did get back to Hong Kong, we set boxes of it. But that was really, really nice to see. And then we start to get to this level of Namche Bazaar, which is this cut-off point where people are starting to experience altitude sickness. Again, the weather was lovely, and it was warm during the day, but cooling down quite rapidly in the afternoon and evening when the sun was going down. Until eventually, we did start to come to Namche Bazaar, where we had to say goodbye to our local porters. They would not venture above Namche Bazaar because of altitude sickness. And you could see some of these were the local porters that the guys had employed en route down here. But they were brilliant, or every one of them. And there's my little friend with his hair lip, still wearing the rugby shirt. So we did keep this guy who'd be very, very helpful as a translator and helping us to be able to get accommodation if camping was not going to be appropriate. So we'd already decided that we were going to have a rest day at Namche Bazaar. So we were very, very fortunate that it happened to be a market day. So we went round and had a look at how people lived. And quite often it was bartering to exchange goods. Money was less of the value out there than we would have in the towns. So people did all their daily business. And also we went round to what we would class as the butcher's department. And that's where you buy your steaks, whatever it might be, for your weekly meals. Just slightly above Namche Bazaar is this place, and it's called Everest View Hotel. Now, when we went there, and that's specifically because that's Everest there. When I went there in 1985, the place was empty. Whoever had built that had a really good forward-looking view of what might happen. Because today and every night, that place is packed. Because people have now got to the opportunity of knowing that they could go to Everest Base Camp or trekking around the area with professional guides and enjoy it. Just to give you some knowledge, nowadays, for you to go to Everest Base Camp from Kathmandu will cost you something generally about £5,000 for them to take you there to Everest Base Camp. If you had aspirations of wanting to go to the summit, the starting price for that is £30,000. Most people, when they select what they need, land up paying about £8,000 to go to Everest Base Camp or £50,000 to go to the summit of Everest. This is the campsite that we had just above Namche Bazaar, and it was probably our last one because it was starting to get very, very cold at night. We did continue with the tents, but because we no longer had the porters, we were advised by this gentleman that we were advised not to carry our stuff, so we hired 2 yaks and a yak man who did exactly the same as porters. Nowadays, the opportunity is either you continue to use yaks or you have high altitude porters, or Sherpas as they're now called. But things were getting really exciting. We could see Everest. We knew we were getting closer. Motivation was high. And there's one of the yak. Well, guess which one the yak is. And there's me 40 years ago. So we kept progressing through these villages. Tambouche Monastery, where again there's prayer wheels. You can talk to the Dalai Lama and he will come out and give you all the rosebuds and pray for you, etc., etc. But we didn't go for that option. But we did stay at Dingbashe, where, as you see, we'd moved into a tea house. But morale was high. This is how they built. Previous expedition boxes and wood that had been made, or plates left over from previous expeditions. That's how people. There were no windows in these little buildings, so cooking was smoke-filled rooms. And this is the lady of the house. She welcomed us and was great. Now things are getting serious. Labouche, where we started experiencing our first entry into the snow line, and we discussed how we were feeling. And people were starting to recognize that they were losing their appetite, headaches were becoming strong, they felt the fatigue. So this was really starting to open up what we were going to do. How did we feel? And as we moved on, then people were getting deeper into their thoughts about, are they going to be able to do it? Having had these discussions, we were fortunate to have an opportunity to go and listen to an American doctor that had been up to Everest Base Camp. He was now on his way down, but he was happy to talk to us about the effects of altitude sickness. That was quite frightening. It was very, very enlightening, and it put it in perspective. Oh my goodness, if it is that bad, if I don't do something about severe altitude sickness, you're going to be dead within 24 hours. It was decision time. So I spoke to the guys and said, what do you want to do, fellas? Do you want to keep going? Do you want to stop here? And I said, I'm not going to force you. You either stay here. If you want to descend, you use the same route down and you go to the tea house that we previously used until we could all meet up. And we left it to individual decisions. From there were just 3 of us. We'd halved the team. And we moved on to what is called Lower Base Camp. Gorak Shep. One single building of a shelter, somebody brave enough to put a tent out there, as the lower base camp area. This was a sense of, we've got this close. We're so close to that. Can I hang in there? Can I do a bit more? Because we're all getting very, very tired. I thought, I'm not going to give up. I'm not going to give up. I knew I was having headaches, but I did not put them into great perspective. So I decided to keep going. The other 2 decided to stay at Gorak Shep, and I went on the moraines towards Everest Base Camp until I got there. Such a relief. It was quite exciting. You see how the small expedition would set themselves out? Far bigger now, it's professional. Far bigger. They have big dining marquees, far much more robust tents, but they all camp in this area. This is the Western Combe, and this is the Khumbu Glacier. Nowadays, the professionals will put ladders across these huge crevasses, and it's all safety ropes to get you safely through this glacier to the ice wall, up onto the ridge, so you can then start ascending. And they would do it in base camp, Camp 1, Camp 2, Camp 3, Camp 4, Camp 5, and then your bid for the summit. No thanks. I was really, really pleased, but I knew I'd just spent all my lot. I was absolutely shattered. So it was time to take a couple of photographs. I put my camera on self-timer, kept my fingers crossed, and thankfully I did get an outcome. I took another one. This one's called Lotsie, as Everest, and then thought, I need to get out of here. So I started the descent back down to join my friends. I was over the moon. It's great. We started to get towards Gorik Shep, and we started to meet up again. As we descended, we got into, this is Gorik Shep today, by the way. Remember, single stone hut? That's what happens now if you go on a paid expedition to Everest Base Camp. You stay in a hotel. Hugely different now. It's a big enterprise. Going back through Loboshay, a lot more built up houses. Tangbushe, which where the monastery was, and the overlooking Namche Bazaar. So we knew as we started descending, we were feeling so much stronger. It was amazing how when you got the oxygen going into your lungs, how quickly you start to recover. Everybody was satisfied with what they'd done, and that was the most important thing. Regardless of where they'd stopped, they were pleased with what they had achieved. And we got to Lukla. Now, Lukla Airport in 1985 was this wooden hut. And they said, if the weather's good, the plane will come. If the weather's bad, the plane will not come. What happens now? We stood around waiting and waiting and waiting until we saw that. Frightening. This short runway with this huge drop off at the end. You had to be brave to get on the aircraft. But we trusted the pilots to be able to do a good job. And then we were delighted that we were given the ticket to be able to take us back to Kathmandu. A couple of days in Kathmandu, needless to say, we celebrated. We had a few beers. We all patted ourselves on the back for what we'd individually achieved, until such time that it was time to say bye-bye to Kathmandu and come back to reality. Get back into the Air Force and start doing our routine. So that was my trip. Thanks for your patience. I am very conscious that we've got an AGM to follow, so hopefully I've not encroached too much on the time.
Questions first.
Yes, please.
Johnny, talk about, the different attributes to get to base camp. To get to Everest, what do you think are the most fundamental attributes the guys need to get there?
Focus, self-belief that you can do it. Being very much aware of your own body. When your body is saying, enough's enough, mate, take advice from your body. But resilience, determination, and the desire to really want to do it. And thinking about working together as a team is very, very important. Yeah.
When you were leaving the small airport
Lukla.
to go to Kathmandu, did you fly over Everest?
No, we didn't. No, it was the opposite way.
Oh.
They went over the end. You could suddenly see this big, and then you turned left as opposed to right. So it was straight back down to Kathmandu.
Scientific explanation there. Turn left.
Yeah.
Thanks very much. Thank you. You've actually enlightened me. I was going to do that with a friend of mine, 85, 86. I was really fit and so was she. But we had no idea because people went there wet behind the ears. But one thing I noticed, you were all wearing sports shoes up to, because that's what we would have been wearing.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't have gone beyond where the altitude started, the altitude sickness. But it showed me that, yeah, we would never have made it to the base camp. No way.
You would do now,
Yeah, but in
because of
those
the
days-
professional, but in 1985,
Yeah.
no. you
So,
were-
did you start wearing walking boots? I noticed you wore them afterwards.
Yeah.
Once you got onto the more difficult terrain.
Once we got above Nancy Bazaar, it
Yeah.
was quite serious, so we put our mountain boots on. Yeah.
Okay, no, lovely, thank you.
John, I just wanted to. How did your high command react?
They were pleased that we got back safely and that we weren't. They didn't have to initiate any rescues. And when we showed them the photographs, they were very pleased with what we'd achieved. Yeah, it was very good. Well, we had to write an expedition report so that it was there for any future expeditions that would follow us on what to do, best advice, what not to do. But at that time, though, it sounds awful, but there weren't that many people that were appropriately qualified to be able to take this expedition. There are now, but at that time, I was one of the few.
John, do you think the commercialisation of Everest is a bad thing?
Yes. Yeah, it's taken away all of the values about Everest for lots of reasons. People now can get to the summit of Everest if they've got enough money. One of the things that's continued to happen, which is bad practice, is that there's a lot of rubbish that gets left all the way down. And the Nepalese government charge £15,000 per person per permit, and that's purely to be able to then get the army to go in there later and clear up all the mess that people have left. It's awful. It's become a rubbish dump, and it all through commercialism, and it's not nice.
Right, one more quick question.
You mentioned Mallory and Irving, and you said they were never seen again. But I think they found a few bits and pieces, didn't they?
They found what they believe to be the inner sole of Irving's boot. That's the closest they got, and they have found a camera, but unfortunately, over the years of the water ingress, there was never anything that could get off the camera to confirm that that belonged to either Irving or Mallory. But they've never found any bodies.
Right, thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, John.